Hello and welcome to Common Ground, an inside look at Suffolk County. I'm your host, Seth McCoy. Tonight we have a special show for you. Lately, the issue of domestic violence has received increased attention through media's focus on the multiple abuse allegations against NFL players. And since October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, today's show will focus on the troubling trend of domestic violence in America. What is the cause and what can be done to stem the tide? On the first half of Common Ground, we welcome Boston City Councilor Ayanna Pressley. Councilor Pressley was elected to the Boston City Council when she was the only woman in a field of 15 candidates and earned one of the 4 at-large spots on the city's 13-member council. Currently, Councilor serves as committee chair of Women in Healthy Communities and recently received recognition for her work fighting domestic violence from the Victims' Right Law Center. For the second half of the show, we sit down with gentlemen from Jane Doe Inc. Joining us is Men's Initiative Coordinator Craig Norberg-Bohm and White Ribbon Day Ambassador John Laing. Jane Doe Inc. is the only statewide sexual and domestic violence nonprofit advocacy membership organization in Massachusetts. They provide expert support and resources to 60 community-based sexual assault and domestic violence groups across the Commonwealth. I hope you enjoy the show. And joining me now is City Councilor Ayanna Pressley talking about a very important issue, which is domestic violence. As you heard in the intro, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Councilor Pressley, welcome to the program.
Good to be back.
Such a great reason to have you here. Great probably isn't the right word, but you are...
An opportunity.
An opportunity, definitely. And you, if I may say, are probably the most educated on the Boston City Council about issues pertaining to women. Obviously, domestic violence crosses across gender lines. Men are also abused in certain instances, but we're going to talk a little bit about how domestic violence impacts women and the communities at large.
Absolutely.
So recently we've been hearing all this talk with the NFL. Ray Rice has been all over the news about what happened with his then fiance, now she's his wife. Initially when this story broke, it was, there were different sides to this argument. Oh, he should just be suspended, or other people like myself said, no, NFL should have a zero tolerance policy. And then of course we saw the second video that TMZ released, which shows the inside the elevator where he slugs her and she hits the banister in the elevator and then falls to the floor. So what were your thoughts when you saw that video?
Oh, well, obviously you're incensed. But my visceral response was, if that is what one would be so brazen as to do in public, right, then what is really happening behind closed doors? Mm-hmm. When that video came out, of course it was devastating and damning, and you're incensed. Mm-hmm. But my concern was that as a country, we would have a quick reaction in sort of the first 15 minutes, mm-hmm, and then fade to black. Mm-hmm. And we will never address effectively the issue of domestic violence unless we are willing to have an ongoing discussion and effort beyond October, right, where we put on a nice ribbon or a button or a pin. Mm-hmm. The work isn't the ribbon. The ribbon is to remind us to do the work. Mm-hmm. And it really begins by us year-round through policy and programming and fostering and nurturing a culture, mm-hmm, and a climate that is zero tolerance to domestic violence, to sexual violence, to rape culture, because the two really, all of these forms of violence, right, forms of violence, there are overlays and intersects.
Yeah, and we certainly see this obviously in popular culture more often than not these days. We talked off camera about Chris Brown being part of the domestic violence equation, yes, where, same thing, where the incident that happened with Rihanna occurred 5 years ago, and yet people still support Chris Brown whenever the conversation turns to that incident. So to me, I look at all these instances where they're out there in the popular culture. Obviously, there are things that happen behind closed doors that we don't ever talk about. We don't see because it doesn't impact
But that's
us.
what I'm saying. I want
Right.
an equity and outrage.
Right.
So I don't want there to be a response and hashtag social media campaigns simply around high profile incidents. That level of outrage needs to be sustainable and exist for your neighbor.
Right.
What you're hearing on the other side of your wall. And we don't need to victim blame. There was a great deal of that in the Ray
Yes.
Rice scenario, which was incredibly disturbing.
And that happens with rape as well. When women get raped, it's, well, what was she wearing? Did she drink
quick
too
to
much?
victim blame.
Right.
But I think that we do this work in injustice when we are only propping up and elevating situations that involve R&B singers such as Chris Brown or athletes such as Ray Rice, because it is perpetuating the idea that there is only one type of perpetrator. And we know that to not be the case.
Right.
And so we are stifling the healing. You know, victims and survivors are looking to us
Right.
and seeing what is our response and whether or not it is a safe space for them to disclose and to seek help.
Right.
And we're sending them very mixed messages, not only because we victim blame, but because the media is only sharing one narrative of who is impacted by domestic violence.
Right, exactly. And I also think that, you know, people, you alluded to this, people really need to speak out. You need to watch out for your neighbor. If you're hearing stuff in the house next door to you, the condo next door to you, or if you're just walking down the street and happen to see something, you need to take the initiative and call the police.
Absolutely.
If you can't get
Domestic
involved.
violence is no longer a family affair, thanks to the legislation of 20 years ago.
Right.
It is a criminal act, and it should be treated as such. However, what I would say is that in wanting to be responsible in this community that we're building of zero tolerance and this culture that we want to foster and intentionally build together, that we also do have to be thinking about interventions with perpetrators, because they often have a pattern of behavior where this is just simply how they resolve conflict and how they communicate and how they act out. And in the same way that I've pushed for John schools for those who have solicited in human trafficking, I do think we have to make sure that we are reaching perpetrators and men, although we know they are not the only people to inflict abuse. They disproportionately have higher numbers, and that's why the Jane Doe campaign, the White Ribbon campaign, which is specifically around boys and men saying, I will do my part to break the cycle of physical and sexual violence against women, is so very important. That's why people like Dan Leibowitz at Sport and Society at Northeastern University and the work that they do with athletes and around athlete culture and masculine sort of normatives, challenging those things, is so very important.
Yeah, and you know, you talked about the human trafficking, which we should tie into this whole issue of domestic violence, because oftentimes, if you are a woman who is being trafficked, there is a high percentage or a high possibility that you are possibly being abused physically by whoever is putting you out on the streets. So you have done so much work on that issue. Just talk a little bit about what the John School is and how you would envision it happening with a domestic violence approach.
Well, that's some of the work that we're doing right now on the human trafficking front. Very pleased to have in the Honorable Mayor Martin J. Walsh, someone who's very committed to taking this issue on in a real way. District City Councilor Frank Baker has also been working on this issue. But I guess what I'm saying is just that we have to engage the entire community, and it has to be an ongoing conversation and work that is done. As hard as it is for someone to conceive that someone that they love could be violated in such an egregious way, physically or sexually, it's harder, Seth, for people to accept that someone they love could violate someone in that way, could be a predator, could be a perpetrator, whether it's human trafficking, sexual assault, or domestic violence. And so that's the conversation we need to be having all the time, and not just in the wake of these high-profile incidents.
How do we start that conversation? How do you envision those conversations?
Well, that's the one
happening?
good thing to come out of this, is that it's a prompt for us to have that conversation. And I'm grateful for outlets such as this that give us a platform to diversify the narratives, to remind people this is also impacting the LGBT community, to talk about why I spent 3 years fighting for a comprehensive sex and health education curriculum within our Boston Public Schools, because that curriculum is not just about safe sex, it is also about healthy relationships. And we have seen quite an uptick in intimate teen partner violence.
I will tell you a personal story from when I was a teenager. My best friend growing up, she had a boyfriend who became violent in that relationship, and unfortunately, my friend stayed with him for longer than she should have. And I remember vividly, I had at this point a telephone in my room, but was not able to answer it, so she called the house line. And when I picked up the phone, all I heard was her screaming, and I knew that her boyfriend was down the street trying to get into the house and cause her harm. And at the time, looking back, I probably should have called the police, but I hung up the phone and ran down the street to go figure out what I could do to help her. And not that that's the right thing, but we do need people who, if you know that your friend is being victimized by her boyfriend or her spouse or whatever, you need to make those calls or let that person know, I'm here to help you. And sometimes that message doesn't always get through, because I had those conversations with Jessica and I said, this is not good for you. How do we get you out of this? And she still went back. She had a restraining order against him and went back until she was finally able to break.
But she's fortunate that she had someone that was willing to offer that sort of support and intervention, but most people don't have that, because there is a great deal of shame around this and isolation around this. So it's not only fear of sort of the conflicts becoming even more violent. It's a fear of judgment. There's such shame, and so.
Well, and there's also the piece that oftentimes in these situations, the abuser is belittling the victim to a point where he or she, in this case we'll talk about women, doesn't believe that they're good enough, and so whatever there is being whatever is being dished out, they deserve it.
But that's the role I believe the government can play, and what I've been advocating for is that for a coordinated response as a city, trauma response and recovery. And most people define trauma solely by families that are surviving after having lost a loved one to homicide. But I want us to, as a city, be addressing trauma and violence in all forms, because violence does beget violence, and we will never have peace in our streets until we have peace in our homes. Many of the high impact players and gang affiliated young men that I've met and I've spent time with grew up in single parented households that were predominantly women whom they saw abused at the hands of someone who said they loved them. There's no way that there isn't a correlation and a connection there. This is affecting our entire city, our entire Commonwealth, and our country. I think of the women in immigrant communities who are victims of these crimes, sexual assault, domestic violence, and they will not report the crimes for fear of deportation.
That's a big issue, because there is a huge population in the immigrant community who comes here, and they don't know that
it is their right.
They can go and seek help.
It is their right. And that's the point, is that there's a lot of hurt out there. And so we have a responsibility to get people on a pathway to healing so they can transition from being victims to being survivors. If you think about most of the women who are in recovery, 1 in 4 of them is a victim of physical or sexual violence. And they are usually addicts because they're self-medicating from that trauma. So there are so many overlays and connections here. And we just have to continue to have this community conversation. We have to have an equity in our outrage, whether this has happened in a high-profile incident to a neighbor, to a man, to a woman, to someone who is heterosexual, to someone who identifies with the LGBT community.
Why do you think it's easier to talk about this issue when it is somebody like a Ray Rice or a Chris Brown or a Ben Roethlisberger who's been accused of assaulting women?
Because that's a comfortable narrative for people. It's a story they're used to hearing. It is much harder to accept that within your own community that there is a threshold that is that high for this level of violence.
Well, and that's a good point to make. We should point out that it's not just these guys who are doing that. There are doctors, there are lawyers.
Absolutely.
There are
and that's
the
truth and the story that makes people uncomfortable. But again, I commend BNN and thank you for this opportunity, because we will not be able to address victims holistically if we are not creating a platform where we can hear the diversity of narratives and the different types of people whom are being impacted. This is not a crime that discriminates. It doesn't care about your sexual orientation. It doesn't care about your race. It doesn't care about your age. And it certainly doesn't care about your zip code. So the media is quick to sort of attach themselves to certain narratives that perpetuate this idea of who commits these crimes. And it's comfortable for people.
Absolutely. How do we change that narrative, though? Because that's the difficult thing. I mean, we see this in all types of violence, even violence that happens in the city. You never hear about the good stories. it's always, oh, well, this happened. Or I think we've even talked about this before. Sometimes when the newspapers or the TV are identifying criminals, it's, John Doe, black man from Roxbury, as opposed to, John Doe from West Roxbury. They
Absolutely.
won't identify.
Well, we certainly have our biases. If if you look at what happens, anytime we tragically lose someone to senseless violence on our streets, that people are much more sympathetic when a family has lost a scholar.
Right.
Than they are someone who is rumored to have been troubled.
Right.
When every life is of value.
Right. And that's what we need to teach people.
Every life is a value. We shouldn't be creating a tiered system or a hierarchy. And for every life that is lost, we have collectively failed.
Right.
And for every life that is saved, then we can share in that collective victory. But this incident, as tragic and upsetting as it is really a prompt and an opportunity for us to spark a national conversation and to think about programming and policies, but more than that, culture. And I hope with the support of good people such as yourself that this will be a conversation and work that will happen year-round, not just in the wake of incidents such as this one or during October,
right, exactly.
Which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Were you surprised when the Ray Rice incident came out that the NFL didn't have a policy about domestic violence and how to handle it? I mean, let's be real, professional sports across the board have had issues with domestic violence for years. I mean, we had a guy who was here playing against the Red Sox who beat his girlfriend or wife in the middle of a street, got arrested, but so I mean, it's not like this is a new thing.
It's not an anomaly.
Right.
So no, it's not an anomaly, and it is surprising, and it is irresponsible.
I was actually reading earlier that more than 70% of U.S. workplaces have no policy to address workplace violence, let alone domestic violence if it occurs. That was the other thing, that struck me, because obviously people are talking about this in social media, whether it's Twitter or Facebook, and I had people who responded to me saying, well, why should they fire him? Like, they can't just release him. He's got his due process. And my response, of course, was, no, he actually doesn't. He has that in the court of law, but by his employer, the NFL, they can fire him. If they have a reason to, they don't have to wait and see what happens with this case. They can just kick him to the curb, which I'm, glad they did so finally.
Well, again, I do worry about the narrative that we're only having one level of intervention for perpetrators, and that it is, so the only narrative is so punitive. We do need to make an example and establish a standard of accountability. And I just want to make sure that that standard of accountability is exactly that, a standard.
Right.
I don't want anyone who is pedestrian to be held to a different standard than someone who is high profile.
So in your world and how you envision it, what would you like to see happen from here? Beyond the conversation, how do you think this needs to be addressed, and how would you, if you were running a program like this, how would you do it?
Oh, wow. Well, I do have to commend the I Want a World campaign, which I was happy to partner with them on, at Jane Doe, which I think has been tremendously helpful, again, in providing a space for testimony for victims to get on a pathway to healing and to know that there's a place for them in the discourse, specifically from the LGBT community, because that has been lacking.
Yep.
So as someone who is an advocate for victims and survivors, I think the first thing is awareness. Otherwise, we can't develop an action, legislatively or otherwise, that's specialized if we're not being honest about how pervasive it is and how diverse it is.
Right.
I really believe in establishing policies that are, culturally competent and gender specific and responsive. And so I think the only way that we do that is to continue to have a conversation again and to diversify who is a part of that conversation, that platform, and sharing their experiences. But I don't believe that these interventions can happen too early. Prevention is the key. So for me, that prevention begins through a comprehensive sex and health education curriculum that also talks about healthy relationships and what that looks like. What we found with a lot of teens who were in violent relationships is they didn't know that it was dysfunctional or toxic because that had become completely normalized. When someone educates them about establishing boundaries, and that when someone wants to go through your phone or tell you how to dress, that is control, and that level of possessiveness is not love.
Right.
So you have to inform that. You have to inform that, and I don't think we can ever begin that too early. So prevention, awareness, and diversifying the stories within that awareness, which will inform the action that we take from a legislative standpoint.
And how do we reach the women out there who may know all of this? They may have a family member or friends who are willing to help them, but yet they still can't seem to get out of that cycle. I mean, we see it all the time, over and over again, and yet there are still women who, if their husband or boyfriend or fiance really kicks them, beats them, disfigures them, they still go back. How do we reach those women to say, there is something better out there for you? You don't have to put up with this.
That's why media campaigns in partnership with everyone from the MBTA to entities like BNN, I can't emphasize enough the difference that makes. You never know who's watching. And we need to let them know that we see you, even though you don't think we do. We see you, and we're here for you, because what this does, it defeats you, it depletes you, it robs you of your sense of self-worth. And so by planting a seed of hope and letting them know that there is a place of refuge, we can help. But it's also the economics. There are a number of women, so when people don't understand the correlation between equal pay for equal work, or how do we address the fact that we have growing poverty and fewer opportunities where people are working at a living wage. Very often women are staying in these situations solely for economics.
Right. Absolutely.
And that becomes a part of the control.
And that's horrifying to think that, there are women out there in bad situations and they can't leave because they don't have a better way yet, economically speaking.
So we need more safe houses. So we need to start intervention early, and I think that begins with education that is about healthy relationships. We need to be honest about the overlays with street violence, domestic violence, sexual violence, human trafficking. We can't talk about violence in a silo as one issue and be honest about how they're all connected. And then we have to address the issue of violence in that way. And we need more, so beyond prevention and awareness, we need more intervention, and then safe houses.
We need more survivors also to get out there and speak
share your story, absolutely.
I mean, I know I can think of a couple of them.
That gives the greatest hope, absolutely.
Exactly, I can think of a couple of them. One who, had 3 small kids, and her husband was abusive to her for many, many years, and finally she got up the courage, and she was, she came here from another country, so for her it wasn't easy, because of course all she knew was her husband, and then the family that she had, and obviously they're neighbors and whatnot, but she got to the point where she was like, I can't do this, I can't live in the situation where my husband beats me in front of my children. So she got the courage and figured out a way out. Good for her. And we need people like her to come out and say, this is how I did it. And yeah, the path I took might not be the best path for you, but you can find your own path to get out.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. And I think just in closing, I would just say that, again, I know it's hard for people to accept that someone that they love and they know could be a victim, but it's even harder for them to accept that someone that they know and they love could be a perpetrator. And that's the conversation that we have got to be having and be honest about. And we have to establish culturally a standard of accountability.
I was just going to talk about accountability, the need for accountability, and for people to say, this can't happen, and we're not going to let this happen.
Call it out, absolutely. But what we see with human trafficking when we first started to work on that issue locally is that it's something that people are sympathetic towards, and they consider to be international, not domestic. And so with something like domestic violence, people are very outraged about what Ray Rice did, but again, they don't have an equity in that outrage for what's happening in their own community. And that's what we need.
And that's absolutely what we need. So I want to talk real quickly. You did your Jump Into Peace event.
Oh,
so tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, thank you so much. much. So again, getting back to my point around the need when it comes to violence prevention and intervention for gender-specific and responsive policies and programming, this is something that has been my mission since I joined the council. And so 2 weeks ago, we held our first annual Jump into Peace, Double Dutch for a community event. And I wanted to do that to really defend the childhood of our girls. They're growing up so quickly. And they're at risk in the same way that our boys are, but they're often given short shrift in the discourse around violence. So much of the narrative is about that our boys are at risk, that they're proven risk, that we're losing them. And my advocacy for girls and women is not to the exclusion of girls and women, is not to the exclusion of boys and men, but it's to say that our destiny is tied. And we need to be participating, sinking our hands in a collective uplift and betterment and not a synchronized drowning. And so the purpose of my event was to highlight girls and women that we've lost to violence, and my sort of rallying cry that we develop more gender-specific and responsive programming.
Well, I have to say, the City of Boston is lucky to have you to advocate for all of its residents and pushing these issues to the forefront. I mean, really, you've done such a great job doing that, so I just have to commend you.
Well, I know you're a runner. You still run, right?
Yes.
Okay, but next year we had over 100 people this year participating. It was beautiful. So second annual.
I will be
Washington
there.
Park. We'll see you, and we'll get you a double Dutch lesson.
Absolutely, because I think I double Dutched once in my life. I don't think it was very successful. So thank you so much.
Always a pleasure. Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And we will be right back to continue this important conversation. Stay tuned.
Hey everybody, listen up.
Listen up, guys.
Hey guys, listen up.
No one should ever hit a woman.
Not their wife, not their girlfriend, not their date.
No woman should have to fear violence.
Especially not from someone they know and trust.
But that's the reality for too many women.
We have to change it.
It's up to each of us, because even one is too many.
Violence against women hurts all of us. Growing up, I was ashamed and afraid of my father when he abused my mom.
The worst abuse of power is when a man raises his hand to hurt a woman. We all have to take responsibility. So if you see someone threatening a woman, step up, speak out, and get help.
Dating violence hurts all of us. So step up and help end it. Because one is too many.
One is too many.
One is too many.
One is too many.
End the violence.
Because it's wrong.
Because one is too many.
It's on us to stop sexual assault.
To get in the way before it happens.
To get a friend home safe.
And to not blame the victim.
It's on us.
To look out for each other.
To not look the other way.
It's on us to stand up.
To step in.
To take responsibility.
It's on us, all of us,
to stop sexual assault.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
It's on us to look out for others who are in a vulnerable situation. I'm Carrie Washington, and it's on all of us to help stop sexual assault. I took the pledge, and you can too, at itsonus.org.
It's on us to be role models for how men treat women. I'm Kevin Love, and it's on us to stop sexual assault. I took the pledge, and you can too, at itsonus.org.
It's on us to be more than a bystander. I'm Randy Jackson, and it's on all of us to stop sexual assault. I took the pledge, you can too, at itsonus.org.
It's on us to never blame the victim. I'm Questlove, and it's on all of us to stop sexual assault. I took the pledge, and you can too, at itsonus.org.
It's on us to recognize that if someone doesn't or can't consent, it's rape. I'm Rose Byrne, and it's on all of us to help stop sexual assault. I took the pledge, and so can you, at itsonus.org.
We have a big problem, and we need your help.
It's happening on college campuses, at bars, at parties, even in high schools.
It's happening to our sisters and our daughters,
our wives and our friends.
It's called sexual assault, and it has to stop.
We have to stop it. So listen up.
If she doesn't consent, or if she can't consent, it's rape, it's assault.
It's a crime. It's wrong.
If I saw it happening and I was taught you have to do something about it.
If If I saw it happening, I speak up.
If I saw it happening, I'd never blame her. I'd help her.
Because I don't want to be a part of the problem.
I want to be a part of the solution.
We need all of you to be part of the solution. This is about respect. It's about responsibility.
It's up to all of us to put an end to sexual assault. And that starts with you.
Because one is too many.
And joining me now on Common Ground, Craig Norberg-Bohm, who is the Men's Initiative Coordinator, and John Laing, who is the White Ribbon Day Ambassador, both from Jane Doe. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for being here. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. We just had City Councilor Ayanna Pressley on talking about domestic violence, so we're continuing the conversation because it's an important one to have. So very briefly, tell me what Jane Doe Inc.
Sure. Well,
is.
first, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having and addressing the topic this way. Jane Doe Inc. is the state coalition against sexual and domestic violence. Statewide, Massachusetts, 57 member programs doing emergency services every day in both sexual assault and domestic violence. Many hotline calls a day, many beds, and they're always full. So it's a busy, busy business.
So we need more beds.
We do.
We need
more beds.
more places.
And as a topic of our segment is that we need prevention.
Right.
We're going to talk about that.
And that's something that Councilor Pressley was talking about, is the prevention piece, not so much reacting to it. It's really how do we stop domestic violence from happening? Obviously, we've heard a lot of domestic violence stories in the news lately with Ray Rice and the NFL.
That's right.
John, when this happened, what was your initial reaction?
So my initial reaction goes back to my initial reaction becoming aware of White Ribbon, which is we just don't hear about it enough. There are so many hidden stories that happen within our community that because people bear shame or whatever it is related to domestic violence in their homes, the conversation is not going on. And White Ribbon and being a White Ribbon ambassador is to say, I have a responsibility as a male, as a man, to say, I will not perpetrate violence against someone else, and I will make sure that when I see it, I call it out for what it is.
See, and that is something that is definitely needed. I mean, obviously, I'm a woman, so I thankfully have not been a victim of domestic violence, but I have certainly walked down the street and had a cat call, or, you know, I mean, these are things that happen all the time to women. And quite frankly, inappropriate most of the times, unless it's, you know, John Bon Jovi calling at me. I don't really want to want that kind of attention.
You don't want to hear it, no.
Right. So I think it's great to have men who stand up and say, you know, that's not cool. And I think that's part of the issue too, is, you know, especially for younger boys, teenage boys, who get into that whole group mentality and they see their friends doing it or think it's cool to do what, you know, calling out on girls. So calling them out or calling men out and saying, you know, that's not cool.
Well, you mentioned something that's really true, which is men operate and boys operate in groups.
Right.
We don't do it on our own. In fact, when we're little, we don't act this way.
Right.
We grow into it somehow.
Right.
We want to change what we grow into, and that's in groups makes a difference.
Well, the other piece of it that I think is really important is we're having this conversation because of recent events that we're seeing on the news. And so everyone's defining domestic violence as this, you know, physical confrontation between a man and a woman. There's a whole gambit of violence that exists. And so to minimize the cat calls, to minimize the other experiences, the withholding of money, the intimidation in others, I think really, you know, cheats the work that we're doing to say that it's only this, where there is a huge gambit that, you know, domestic violence is defined as. And we need to be aware of all those. We need to have conversations about all those. I mean, we were hearing some of the conversations with City Councilor Ayanna, and I think it's really important that we do education on this. We need to get into the schools. We need to talk about what healthy relationships look like. We need to do that early so that our children can say, you know what? I don't see the life or the interactions in my home the way that you say that it's supposed to be. And I need help. My parents need help. My mother needs help, whatever it might be, so that we can identify those, not to be punitive.
Or I need help, because we should also touch on the fact that domestic violence could be a mother beating their child, a father beating their child. It's not necessarily just a couple relationship.
All the interactions happen, you know, and so there's a big one with men against women. There's a dynamic there in our culture that's about that. It's kind of the example for the rest of us.
Yes. Right.
You know, and that between two men this happens, between two women this happens, between women and men it happens opposite. But the big example is what men represent.
Yes.
You know, and I just want to touch on this real quickly because obviously we're focusing a lot on domestic violence, men perpetrating against women, but we should say that there are women out there who do abuse their male partners.
Absolutely.
So yes, the percentages aren't as great, but that's certainly a segment of the population that's out there.
And the services across the state are helpful and useful for men or survivors as well.
Right.
And so every survivor deserves our full care and concern.
Now, we talked about the fact that this is obviously on the forefront because everybody saw the videos that came out. I was struck, though, by the difference of outrage between the first video coming out, which shows Ray Rice pulling his then fiance out of the elevator, versus the response when you actually see him slugging her and her hitting her head against the rail in the elevator.
Right.
Was that shocking to either of you? Not the video itself, but the response,
in the second one, you saw a crime committed.
Right.
In the first one, you didn't.
Right.
And what you witnessed was a different actual moment.
Right. And I mean, initially he was given a 2-game suspension, but the whole, the point I'm trying to make is, was it more shocking to you to see the difference? I don't know if you experienced this in your own personal lives of people saying, oh, well, you know, we don't know what really happened in the elevator, to then people being like, oh, wow, it was a lot worse than I even imagined, which is what I heard from people.
So for me, I think we don't recognize what domestic violence looks like, and that's an issue. I mean, for me as a husband, if my wife passed out in the elevator, I would not drag her by her feet out. That in itself sends a signal. I would try to make her the most comfortable, make sure that she's not impacted in any kind of harmful way that she could hurt herself or that I could hurt her while I was bringing her out there. So that in itself tells you that there was a problem. And we as a society try to, because of who people are, justify and make excuses when things are really clear to us, but we don't want to accept it.
Why do we say that it's okay?
Why do we say it's okay?
Right.
Well, there's a big answer, which is the content of being a real man. The content of being a real man includes this, that I get to have, especially big, strong men who are at the top of the pile, which are men who are gladiators, who are football players, for example. You can say other sports as well, but our most successful men, and you question the ones who aren't violent.
Right.
And so so this is about standards and norms.
You know, that's actually a good point to make, because that was another argument that I heard from people was, well, how can you expect these guys to be on the field and be so violent and then come off the field and be gentle?
Yeah, that's right.
Because that's what you're supposed to do in a loving relationship. You're not supposed to come home and beat your wife or your girlfriend. You're supposed to be there to say...
Well, there's a lot of thinking that, is this inevitable? Is it inevitable? It's like, you push me so far, I will. Right. Is that how we all have to think? I don't think so anymore.
Well, and we talked about the broader conversation, and of course this doesn't happen with everybody in terms of steroid use, but that is something also that's done in professional sports, unfortunately. And so maybe that's part of that conversation too. If we're having a conversation with people about how to prevent domestic violence, especially in, obviously there are high school students who...
And the answer is getting involved. You think about the case. This case you saw on television, this particular individual, it's always very complicated and confusing about who cares about who and who wants what. You have to step back and say, there are thousands of cases.
Right.
And what is it that we all need to know that works about all of them?
And they're all different. I mean, every case is individual.
Individually they are.
Yeah. So it's not, there's no cookie cutter kind of...
What is that? Like, prevention is about how we raise our children.
Right.
And how as a group we respond to each other. And so, fathers have this huge role to play in terms of what they represent to their sons and daughters and to their partners. Coaches of sport have this huge role to play, what they represent for character. So these two populations in particular, dads and coaches, are incredibly welcomed in terms of their willingness to step up and speak out. Absolutely.
What do you say if, I don't know if either one of you has a son, but what do you say to your son when they see this type of activity? How do you respond to it? Do they ask questions?
All the time. I mean, this is like, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
And that it's confusing when you say you're supposed to be strong and powerful, but now I'm not supposed to be that way.
Yes.
Right.
It's confusing.
Yes, and for me, I think the best thing that I can do for my 4 sons is show them an example of what a loving relationship looks like in how I treat my wife.
Right.
And so they see, my son saw, the events on television, and he just said, that's just not right. It was very clear to him that that's not okay behavior. It's not something that he grew up seeing.
Right.
And I think for many people, and I would suspect maybe even for those that we're talking about today, they grow up in homes where it might be much more normalized than we would want it to be as a society.
Right, absolutely.
And we have to make a clear message to people that this is not normal behavior, it's abnormal behavior, that it's a learned behavior. And we're teaching our children, our families, the wrong messages around what relationships look like.
And we need more people to actually speak out. So even if they're not impacted directly, if they know a friend or a family member
We're all bystanders, aren't we?
Right.
We're all in it. And if we're at a party, this is a simple example that so many of us find ourselves into at some point, and we see something we don't like. What is our actual responsibility, and what are our options to help make a difference at that moment? It's a good question.
Right, absolutely. What about when we see the victim blaming, and that has happened?
Like, why does she do that?
Right,
Or why does she stay?
stay? Oh, she must have deserved it. I mean,
it's an easy question to ask because you don't want to imagine yourself in it. But it's a harder question to ask, why does he do it? Why does the perpetrator perpetrate? What's behind all of that? And how can I be, if I might say, supportive or useful to hold that person accountable? What can I actually do? I'll know him, maybe I know the person, I'll see them tomorrow.
Yeah.
Maybe I grew up with them. I have an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. You do, and that's what you need to do. You need to speak out
That's
and
right.
say,
I mean, men ready to help. There's hundreds and thousands of us who are ready to help, who have not been so loud. They've been fairly silent. Now's the time to completely change that.
What about when this also happened with the Ray Rice incident? Well, she swung at him first, which, whatever. I won't get into.
You mean the video?
Right.
Yeah.
I frankly didn't see that, but what do you say to people who say, well, if she hits me, I'm going to hit her back?
Yeah, you have every right to defend yourself, and defend yourself doesn't mean you as a much stronger person, just go out and knock them, cold. You can hold them away from you. You can prevent them from, causing harm to you. But to swing at her the way that he did, I think, is just completely unacceptable, and self-defense is not a justification for that.
I agree with that 100%. Tell me a little bit about the White Ribbon Day.
Well, let me say a bit about its background.
Sure.
We're going into our 8th year. And the State Coalition has been encouraging its membership to do work in the schools and to also work in the communities to engage men at large as their friends and allies in solving the problem. White Ribbon Day is an outreach to men and boys who are ready to help to stand up and say so. And we use the first Thursday in March. And so that'll be March 5th, 2015. And we call that White Ribbon Day. We organize a large rally at the State House. Public is welcome. Often the governor speaks. We have other speakers. And we have a great program to engage local communities in how they can be part of the solution, how men are welcome in the conversation and have a huge role to play. In fact, a necessary role to play.
Yes.
And so a lot of men who are watching this get it already, and absolutely they want to do something. Well, here's an opportunity and here's a way to do it, is to support the White Ribbon Day campaign.
And I think the other important piece of that is, men need to end violence against women. This is not a woman's issue. It's up to men to say that I'm not going to perpetrate that violence, and I'm not going to be that bystander that allows other men to perpetrate it.
I'm not going to let you either. I'm going to help you not do that.
Yes.
Right, absolutely. You need to really get in.
Yeah, we need to be more literate about taking care of ourselves. There's other ways to do things.
And Councilor Pressley was talking about that in the segment earlier, about having that conversation, really starting young and making sure that people know, as you were mentioning again, what a healthy relationship is. It's not.
It's a kind of strength that we can be really proud of.
Right.
This is not about some weakness in any sense of the word.
And she made the point too of, keeping the conversation going. Just because we're all talking about it now because of the Ray Rice incident, because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, the conversation should not end on October 31st. It needs to continue.
Well, the thing that an ambassador can do is organize what we call a proclamation moment, which is a declaration of the purpose, and get conversations going at home, at work where they work, at where they pray if they're faith-oriented, or other opportunities. There are so many opportunities. Maybe they're a Little League coach. They can just sit down with their team and talk about it. That's exactly what we want to do.
Teachers need to be talking about it, coaches, mentors.
That's right.
I was saying earlier to the counselor that I read that more than 70% of U.S. workplaces have no policy against workplace violence, let alone domestic violence. Is that shocking to you?
It is. I mean, it's like this is part of what the NFL is struggling with. We're an employer. What should I do? I'm protecting my market.
Right.
So how do we respond? Every business has that question. I want to protect my image.
Well, and let's talk about that for 2 seconds. The fact that the NFL wasn't going to do anything until everybody was up in arms, including a lot of women who
the power of protest.
Yeah, who pay their dollar to go see their teams and buy the merchandise.
Something a business can do is to have family leave.
Right.
And to participate in the new Family Leave Act that allows for time off without any concern about the job to deal with court or police or domestic violence confrontation, counseling, all these for both the. So this is something employers can do.
Absolutely. Yes. What else can we do as a community to get people to really get away from victim shaming and supporting the abusers, because that does happen. I mean, Chris Brown, that happened with his case against Rihanna. It was sort of like, oh, well, he's still hot, I would still date him. Like these were comments on Twitter, actual comments from girls out there who were like,
it is really confusing.
Right.
In high school, the way you showed someone that you liked them was to do something crazy.
Right. Yeah.
Then they knew they really liked them.
Yeah. Right.
And this carries on into young adult.
Yeah.
And so how do you switch that around? I think it needs to be discussed at that high school level, at the middle school level, and we need to be an example of saying, hey, it's not been great. We're going to change it.
Right.
And we're going to change it now. And look at us. We're saying it's going to change.
And the stories need to be told. People need to be able to relate to someone else's story to understand that this is happening in my life, and and I'm relating to their experience.
Right.
And it's not okay. What I'm experiencing is not okay. I shouldn't accept it. I need to ask somebody for help. I need to know how to ask for help and how that help is going to be safe to make sure it doesn't create any further harm to me.
We need to have more survivors coming out and talking about the fact that they were a victim of domestic violence. They were able to leave their husband or their boyfriend or what have you and make a better life for themselves.
That's right. And the persons that know that survivor can already have information about where to go for help. They can have hotline numbers. They can be prepared to be supportive and understand that it takes 7 or more times of leaving to stay gone.
Right.
It's not something anyone and it's about any relationship where you have a commitment.
My mother is a victim witness advocate in one of the courts in the Commonwealth, and we were talking the other night, and she had 3 cases recent of domestic violence. 2 of them were going back to their husbands. One of them, thankfully, was going to be testifying against her husband. But it's as we're talking about this, I was thinking, it almost might make sense to have somebody who has walked away from their abusive spouse to be in that court situation to help those women who then come in.
To have the courage for that?
Exactly.
It is courage, but it's also circumstances and opportunity. That's what the support agencies offer, is opportunity. Because it's not always about courage, it's about, I don't have the money,
right.
I don't have the place to go, I have kids, what is going to happen with changed school systems? There are big questions that are besides courage. They've got a lot of courage to stay sometimes.
Right, and I know, so if people are looking for places to go, they can go to the Jane Doe website. You guys can help navigate.
That's right.
And if you go to that site, the first thing that pops up is a window that says, if you think that you aren't in a safe space, escape. So, and that's a good message and one that should be encouraged to be put out there to women, that there is hope out there. There are people who are willing to help you.
Yes.
Any survivor can go to the website, find your service option, put in their city or town, and find the closest service that can be available to them. And they don't have to be an immediate crisis. They can call and say, this is happening, I'm concerned about it. What do you think? That's what they're there for.
Yeah, and a lot of times it does take some time for some women to get to that point where they're ready to ask for help, and they might not have a phone that they can use freely, they might not have internet that they can use freely. Right. So for some of these women, it is about, when they're going to the grocery store, when you're alone for, an hour and you know that you could talk to somebody else and say, I need help, I'm in this situation, pass a note, whatever. I mean, we see it in movies and TV, but these things happen in real life in order to escape bad situations.
Circling back to prevention, the recent news about the Ravens player has coaches calling us more than before. And I had the opportunity to be on the field at Boston BC High with the varsity football team talking about this specifically. And it was a really wonderful moment to be able to ask boys to think about this, that they actually have an opportunity to make some change. That I need their help to be leaders.
Right.
That's what That's what this is about.
Right, and talking to them as if they're bystanders. They could be a bystander to an incident as opposed to being a perpetrator.
Well, that's exactly what we were there for.
Right.
Yes. So we need their help.
You guys should go to every single high school, middle school in the Commonwealth. You'll never have a down
maybe
day.
That'll happen.
Right? Wouldn't that be fantastic?
That's right. And there are people who are already in those middle schools can carry this message quite immediately.
Yeah.
They can talk about it right away.
Talk about SafeLink. What is SafeLink?
Do you want to talk about it? It's the state hotline around that is organized by with state funding and some federal funding to do for 24/7 emergency service that arrange for where they know where the open beds are right now, they where services are. They help with immediate counseling. So SafeLink is a resource.
Now we talked earlier about the beds being full most of the time, and of course my response was, well, we need more beds. But really the response should be, we don't need any beds because this, at some point, this won't be an issue.
Well, the SafeLink will go through your options and say, well, assess if you're in immediate danger, and then what are your options between friends and family, distant relatives? Then beds become the last resort because they're rare and precious.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I look forward to the day where those beds aren't necessary because we're doing the job that we need to as a Commonwealth to make sure that everyone is safe. And I know we can't do that to 100% certainty, but we can sure try a whole lot better than we're doing.
It definitely takes a community response, and so everyone talking about this and caring about it is what matters. We have this old thinking that it's private, it's strictly private business, and that's just the way that has to go away.
Yeah, and you would think in 2014 that notion has come to pass, but it really hasn't.
Not completely, not at all.
It does take,
it's your business, I'm with somebody and I don't want to get into your stuff, and you can get mad at me for getting into your stuff. Just say, well, look, we can't be that way anymore. I'll help. Tell me what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, this goes for a number of things, whether it's child abuse, domestic violence. It's you have to, if you believe something is happening, you need to call somebody and let them know, whether it's the police or you could even call a social worker and say, hey, I don't know what's happening in this house, but there might be some issues, whatever it is. But people need to, it's like after 9/11, if you see something, say something.
Yeah.
We need to be doing that with these.
Very similar.
Right.
Yeah. We need to know how to identify it.
Right.
Yeah.
And not to put yourself in harm's way, certainly. But if there's a situation that you're seeing, you need to make that call and say, whether it's to the victim or to the police.
Well, there are times when it's time to call the police.
Right.
Yes.
Other times it's time to call the teacher.
Right.
It's time to call the authority or to call their friends.
Right.
And do things together. Say this is something that you might see something that's not so far that there is dangerous for killing somebody or creating or cutting someone or getting that degree of seriousness.
Right.
But it's something that you're just seeing them being incredibly disrespectful.
And no one has the right to harm you.
And that's as important to intervene as the others.
Yeah,
you don't wait till somebody
and there are
gets hit.
signs. Those cat calls are a start of one's perception about their role over somebody else.
Absolutely.
And so engaging someone in a conversation that says that's not okay. How would you feel if that was your mother, your sister, your daughter being called out like that?
Well,
engaging in a conversation that says, do you understand the impact of your behavior on your children? Because some of them think that it's just between the adults and no one else is being impacted. Or someone will say, well, it's happening in this home, but it's not really impacting me. But if I know about it and it's in that home, of course it's impacting me. And
it doesn't just happen in heterosexual relationships either.
It can be relationships all the time.
Yeah.
It's in similar proportions.
Yes.
Right.
The recent campaign for Jane Doe Inc. includes reaching out to survivors in the queer community. It's not an invisible community here, and it's the community needs the same respect. The survivors there and the offenders there deserve the same interventions that everyone else gets.
Right.
And our programs are getting better at it. I have to say, not all our programs are as good at that as they need to be, but we're getting better.
Yes.
And that's half the battle.
That's right.
Yes.
How do people reach out to Jane Doe if they want to either help spread the word, become an ambassador, or...
Well, JaneDoe.org has it all. And towards the bottom of the page is White Ribbon Day, or you can say whiteribbonday.janedoe.org. That works as well. And we have a full website about the campaign. It's easy to find a way to plug in. Individual men can join as ambassadors. It's a simple task to ask friends to take the pledge and wear the ribbon, and or organizations can join as affiliates and sponsor the campaign in their local city or town.
Yeah.
which is great. I want to thank you both for being
You're
here.
welcome.
It's such a
Thank you.
great role that you guys are playing in the community.
Thank you for having us.
Sure, you're welcome.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And again, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. If you or somebody you know is in trouble, reach out, make the call, get some help. Have a good night.